The temperature was minus 40 degrees Celsius, the kind of cold that makes your lungs burn with every breath, that turns exposed skin black with frostbite in minutes, that transforms the landscape into something alien and hostile. It was December 1939, and along the Kola River in eastern Finland, a small man was lying motionless in the snow. He had been there for 6 hours. He would remain there for 6 more. His name was Simo Heiha, and in his hands he held what other snipers called a death sentence, a rifle with no telescopic sight. Just simple iron sights, the kind that other marksmen had abandoned years ago in favor of modern optical technology. His fellow Finnish snipers thought he was insane. They used scopes, they used the latest equipment, and they were dying because of it. The Soviets had sent counter-sniper teams into these forests, trained marksmen with German telescopic sights, hunting for Finnish snipers. They looked for the glint of sunlight on glass. They watched for the telltale flash that betrayed a scope's position. They found the Finnish snipers who used modern equipment. They killed them one by one, but they never found Simo Heiha, because his rifle had no glass to catch the light, no scope to fog in the brutal cold, nothing but metal sights that he had learned to trust through years of hunting in these same frozen forests. Other snipers called his choice suicide. They said iron sights were primitive, inferior, a relic of an earlier age. They said you couldn't achieve accurate kills at distance without magnification. They said he was throwing away every technological advantage. They were wrong. In the 100 days that followed, Simo Heiha would prove them catastrophically wrong. He would kill more enemy soldiers than any sniper in the history of warfare. And he would do it all without ever looking through a scope. This is the story of the White Death, the 5'3" farmer who became the Soviet Army's worst nightmare, the man who turned obsolete equipment into the deadliest weapon of the Winter War, the sniper who proved that sometimes the old ways are the best ways and that the weapon doesn't make the warrior. When Giants Collide with Ghosts, November 30th, 1939, the date Finland's world ended. That morning, nearly 500,000 Soviet troops crossed the Finnish border. Behind them came an avalanche of steel and fire that seemed unstoppable. 6,500 tanks, 3,800 aircraft, endless artillery batteries, the largest invasion force assembled since the Great War, all pointed at a country of fewer than 4 million people. Joseph Stalin wanted territory. He claimed he needed a buffer zone to protect Leningrad from potential invasion. The city sat just 20 miles from the Finnish border, vulnerable, exposed. Stalin demanded that Finland cede substantial portions of the Karelian Isthmus. He offered land in exchange, vast stretches of worthless wilderness in return for strategic territory. The Finnish government refused. They knew that giving Stalin what he wanted would only make him want more. They knew that nations who surrendered territory to powerful neighbors rarely kept their independence for long. So Stalin decided to take what he wanted by force. His generals promised him victory within 2 weeks. They told him the Finnish defenses would crumble, that the tiny Finnish army would collapse at the first sight of Soviet armor. They planned to present him with a conquered Finland as a birthday present. Stalin would turn 60 on December 21st. His generals assured him the war would be over by then. The mathematics of the situation seemed to support their confidence. The Soviet Union had a population of 168 million. Finland had 3.7 million. The Red Army deployed tanks that outnumbered Finland's entire armored force by 200 to 1. The Soviet Air Force sent nearly 4,000 aircraft against Finland's 130, most of which were obsolete. By every measurable standard, this should have been a massacre. It was, but not the one Stalin expected. What the Soviet planners failed to understand was that Finland had advantages that couldn't be counted on paper. Every Finnish man knew how to ski. Most had hunted since childhood. They understood the forests, the frozen lakes, the brutal winters that killed unprepared men as efficiently as bullets. The Finns had equipment designed for Arctic warfare, white camouflage suits that made them invisible against the snow, boots and clothing that kept them alive in temperatures that froze Soviet soldiers in their dark khaki uniforms. And Finland had something else, something Stalin's numbers couldn't measure. Finland had men who refused to surrender their country, men who would rather die fighting than live under Soviet occupation. Men like Simo Heiha, the farmer who became Death. Simo Heiha was born on December 17, 1905, in the municipality of Rautjärvi in southern Finland. He was the second youngest of 8 children in a Lutheran farming family. There was nothing particularly remarkable about his early life. He worked the family farm. He attended school. He learned the skills that every Finnish boy learned: skiing through deep snow, navigating dense forests, surviving in conditions that would kill a city dweller. But Simo was different in one crucial respect. He could shoot, not just hunt, though he hunted plenty. The forests of Finland were full of game, elk and deer and rabbits and birds. Every Finnish farmer hunted. It wasn't sport, it was survival. But young Simo didn't just hunt, he studied it. He learned to track animals through snow so deep it would swallow a man to his waist. He learned to wait for hours in freezing temperatures without moving, without making a sound. He learned to judge distance instinctively, to account for wind and elevation without conscious thought. Most importantly, he learned to shoot precisely, economically, 1 bullet, 1 kill. At 17, Heiha joined the Suojeluskunta, the Finnish Civil Guard, a voluntary military organization that trained young men for the defense of their country. His instructors immediately recognized something exceptional. Heiha could hit a target at 150 meters 16 times in 1 minute with a bolt-action rifle in freezing conditions, while other young men struggled to manage 6 or 7 accurate shots. Heiha was landing 16. His small stature, just 5 feet 3 inches tall, made him less visible, easier to conceal. His patience, honed through years of hunting, allowed him to remain motionless for periods that would drive other men mad. In 1925, at age 19, Heiha began his 15-month compulsory military service in the Bicycle Battalion 2 in Raivala. He attended non-commissioned officer school and served as a conscript officer in Bicycle Battalion 1. In 1938, a year before the war, he received formal sniper training at a training center in Utti. His training officers were astonished by his abilities. Major Tapio Saarlainen, who later studied Heiha extensively, reported that he could estimate distances up to 150 meters within a margin of error of 1 meter, at distances where most men would guess wrong, by 10 or 20. When the Soviet Union invaded on November 30, 1939, Simo Heiha was 34 years old. He reported for duty with the 6th Company of Infantry Regiment 34, stationed along the Kola River. His commanding officer was Lieutenant Arne Juutilainen, a man who had earned the nickname the Terror of Morocco during his service with the French Foreign Legion. Juutilainen had fought Berber rebels in the Atlas Mountains. He had learned guerrilla warfare the hard way, in close combat against irregular forces who knew every inch of their terrain. He recognized immediately that Heiha was exceptional. The Kola sector was a nightmare. The Soviets threw division after division against Finnish positions. Tanks, artillery, endless waves of infantry. The Finns were outnumbered 4-1 at the start. Later, the ratio would grow to 10-1. The fighting was so intense, so relentless, that the Finnish defenders coined a phrase that became legendary. Kola kestää. Kola holds. Major General Voldemar Haglund asked Lieutenant Juutilainen if Kola would hold. Juutilainen replied with words that became a national rallying cry. Kola will hold, unless the orders are to run away. When modern equipment became a death sentence before Simo Heiha proved what iron sights could do, Finnish snipers were dying because of their telescopic sights. Corporal Urho Virtanen was one of the best marksmen in Infantry Regiment 34. He carried a Swedish-made rifle with a German telescopic sight, the finest equipment available. On December 8, 1939, he took position on a ridge overlooking a Soviet supply route. The first hour went well. 3 Soviet soldiers dead, each kill clean and precise. He never got a 4th. A Soviet counter-sniper had been watching, waiting. He saw the glint, a brief flash of sunlight reflecting off Virtasen's telescopic lens. 1 shot, Virtasen died instantly. The bullet entered through his eye, driven by the reflection that had given away his position. 3 days later, Private Toivo Korhonen made the same mistake. Different position, different time of day, same result. The morning sun caught his scope for a fraction of a second. A Soviet bullet found him before he could fire again. The Finns called it the death flash. Telescopic sights were supposed to give snipers an advantage. Instead, they were getting men killed. The lenses reflected light. In the low-angle winter sun, even on overcast days, a scope could betray a sniper's position from hundreds of meters away. The glass fogged in the extreme cold. The temperature differential between a warm human eye and a frozen metal scope created condensation that obscured vision at critical moments. The extra height required to look through a scope meant raising your head several centimeters higher, exposing more of your profile to enemy fire. In a sniper duel, those extra centimeters meant death. Simo Heiha watched his comrades die. He listened to the reports. He understood what was happening, and he made his decision. He would use iron sights, the simple metal sights that other snipers called primitive, obsolete, inferior. The sights that wouldn't fog in the cold, that wouldn't reflect light, that would allow him to keep his profile as low as possible, his head barely rising above the snow. His weapon was a Finnish variant of the Russian Mosin-Nagant rifle, the M2830, nicknamed Pistikorva because of its distinctive front sight that resembled a Spitz dog's head. It was a bolt-action rifle, nothing special by 1939 standards. Other snipers were using telescopic sights that could magnify targets 4 or 5 times. Heiha refused to use a scope. His reasoning was precise, tactical, and would prove devastatingly effective. First, telescopic sights required a sniper to raise his head higher, to look through the lens. Heiha kept his profile minimal, his head barely visible above the snow. Second, in extreme cold, telescopic lenses fogged constantly. Iron sights had no glass to fog. Third, scopes reflected light, betraying a sniper's position. Iron sights were matte metal and reflected nothing. Fourth, and this was psychological, Heiha trusted his own eyes more than any optical device. He had spent 17 years hunting in these forests. He knew instinctively how to judge distance, windage, elevation. A scope would only slow him down. The Soviet snipers he faced used the finest scopes available. They were trained professionals, many of them veterans of previous conflicts. They had every technological advantage. Heiha killed them anyway. The art of becoming snow. Simo Heiha's daily routine was methodical, almost ritualistic. Before dawn, he would dress in his white camouflage suit, a heavy snow smock that covered everything except his eyes. He packed a single day's worth of food: hard bread, frozen sausage, a few lumps of sugar for energy, a canteen of water worn inside his coat to keep it from freezing solid, extra ammunition, though he rarely needed much, his rifle, nothing else, no tent, no sleeping bag, no survival gear. Everything he needed was in the forest. He would ski to a predetermined position, a spot he had scouted days or weeks before, a slight rise with good visibility, a fallen log that provided cover, a snowdrift that concealed his silhouette. Then he would prepare his position with the care of a master craftsman. First, he built a low wall of packed snow in front of his position. This would conceal his muzzle flash and provide a stable rest for his rifle. But here was Heiha's innovation, something that separated him from every other sniper in the Winter War. He poured water over the snow wall and let it freeze solid. The ice was harder than packed snow, more stable for resting his rifle, and it wouldn't shift during long hours of waiting. It also wouldn't create a puff of disturbed snow when he fired, which could give away his position. Second, he packed snow into his mouth. This was critical and excruciating. In -40-degree temperatures, every breath created a visible cloud of condensation. That cloud could be seen from hundreds of meters away, a white flag announcing a sniper's presence. By holding snow in his mouth, Heiha cooled his breath so it wouldn't fog in the air. The cold burned his gums, made his teeth ache, caused his tongue to go numb. He didn't care. Survival demanded it. Then he waited, sometimes for hours, sometimes all day, lying motionless in temperatures that would kill an unprepared man in minutes. His fingers grew numb inside his gloves. His legs cramped. Ice formed on his eyelashes. He didn't move. A sniper's greatest weapon isn't his rifle, it's patience. And Simo Heiha had more patience than any man the Red Army had ever faced. When a target appeared, a Soviet soldier crossing open ground, an officer giving orders, a machine gun crew setting up position, Heiha took his shot. One bullet, one kill. Then he relocated before the enemy could determine where the shot came from. He never fired twice from the same position, never gave the Soviets a pattern to predict, never stayed long enough for counter-battery fire to find him. The Soviets quickly learned to fear the Kola sector. Reports flooded back to headquarters of an invisible killer who struck without warning. Patrols disappeared. Officers died mid-sentence, cut down by bullets that seemed to come from nowhere. Machine gun nests went silent, their crews dead before they could return fire. Entire squads refused to advance across open ground, knowing that somewhere in the white wilderness, death was waiting. The White Death awakens terror. The psychological effect was devastating. Soviet soldiers began calling him Belaya Smirt, the White Death. They told stories of a ghost who could appear anywhere, who killed without sound, who couldn't be trapped or cornered or caught. Morale collapsed. Soldiers refused to cross open ground. Officers ordered men forward at gunpoint. Some soldiers shot themselves in the hand or foot, preferring a wound and evacuation to another day in Heiha's killing ground. Commissars, political officers assigned to enforce loyalty, had to threaten execution to get men moving. It didn't help. Fear of the White Death was stronger than fear of the firing squad. One Soviet sergeant wrote in his diary, later recovered from his frozen body, "We are not fighting men. We are fighting a ghost. He sees everything. We see nothing. Tomorrow, I will die. I know this." He was right. He died the next morning, a single bullet through the throat. Another entry from a different soldier. Kolya was standing next to me. We were talking about his daughter. Then he was gone. No sound, just gone. I ran. I am not ashamed. No man could stand against the White Death. Soviet commanders reported increasing cases of what they called Finnish forest syndrome. Soldiers who simply refused to enter the woods. They would stand at the tree line shaking, unable to move forward. Some had to be physically pushed. Others ran. A few turned their rifles on their own officers. The NKVD, Stalin's secret police, executed dozens of soldiers for cowardice in the Kola sector. It made no difference. The fear was too deep, too visceral. Better to face a firing squad than to walk into those forests knowing that death was watching, waiting, invisible. The Red Army tried everything to eliminate Heiha. They sent counter-sniper teams, trained marksmen with telescopic sights whose sole mission was to locate and kill him. It didn't work. The Finnish sniper was too well concealed, too patient. He spotted them before they spotted him. One Soviet sniper killed several Finnish soldiers over several days, hunting specifically for Heiha. He waited all day for his target to appear. As the sun began to set, he decided his chance had passed. He rose to his knees. The sunlight glinted off his telescopic sight. Heiha was still waiting. He put a single bullet through the Soviet sniper's head from 450 meters. They tried artillery. When they suspected Heiha was operating in a particular area, they called in massive barrages, hundreds of shells screaming down on a single patch of forest. The bombardments killed trees, churned up snow, created craters. Heiha wasn't there. He had already moved. They tried mass infantry assaults, overwhelming the sniper positions with sheer numbers, dozens of men charging across open ground, hoping that some would survive to reach the Finnish lines. Heiha killed them as they came. 5, 10, 15 men in a single engagement. His record for a single day was December 21st, 1939. The same day Stalin had expected to celebrate victory over Finland. Instead, Simo Heiha killed 25 Soviet soldiers that day. 25 confirmed kills in the few hours of usable daylight that Finland receives in December. The mathematics of that achievement are almost impossible to comprehend. The numbers that defy belief. In fewer than 100 days of active combat, Simo Heiha killed at least 505 Soviet soldiers with his rifle. Some sources estimate the number as high as 542. These are confirmed kills, verified through Finnish military records, observed and documented by fellow soldiers. He also killed approximately 200 more with a Suomi submachine gun during close-quarters engagements when his unit fought as regular infantry. That's over 700 enemy soldiers killed by one man in 3 months. To put this in perspective, the most famous American sniper, Chris Kyle, had 160 confirmed kills across 4 combat tours in Iraq. The legendary Soviet sniper Vasily Zaitsev, immortalized in the film Enemy at the Gates, had 242 confirmed kills during the entire Battle of Stalingrad. Heha more than doubled Zaitsev's count in 1/3 of the time, and he did it without a telescopic sight, using iron sights that other snipers called obsolete. Consider the conditions. Winter in Finland brings only about 4 hours of usable daylight. The temperature was regularly minus 40 degrees Celsius. Heha was lying motionless in snow for hours at a time, making precision shots with frozen fingers in conditions that would incapacitate most men. And he was doing it day after day, week after week, without rest, without relief, knowing that every time he took a shot, Soviet artillery might zero in on his position. The Finns called him Taika Ampuja, the magic shooter. He became a symbol of Finnish resistance, proof that courage and skill could overcome impossible odds. Finnish newspapers published his kill counts. He was featured in magazines. The government declared him a national hero. On February 17, 1940, they gave him a gift, a custom-built Sako M28-30 rifle with his name engraved on the stock. Heha accepted it quietly. He preferred his old rifle, the one he knew, the one that had kept him alive, but he used the new one. It would have been disrespectful not to. Kola holds. The Battle of Kola lasted from December 7, 1939 to March 13, 1940. It was one of the most brutal engagements of the Winter War. The Kola River was little more than a creek, surrounded by soil so frozen that the ground was nearly impossible to dig. Finnish soldiers created defensive positions in shallow trenches and foxholes, fortifications that would have been inadequate against any normal assault. But the defense wasn't about fortifications. It was about the men. Lieutenant Arne Juutilainen commanded with a combination of tactical brilliance and absolute refusal to yield. When General Hägglund asked if Kola would hold, Juutilainen's response became legend. Kola will hold unless the orders are to run away. He meant it literally. A week earlier, he had received a regimental order to withdraw. He disregarded it. Lieutenant Colonel Wilhelm Taitinen, who commanded Infantry Regiment 34 at the Kola front, later said that Juutilainen created the Kola spirit. The Red Army fired an estimated 40,000 artillery rounds at the Kola defense line during a single day in March. The Finnish artillery could fire a maximum of 1,000 rounds per day. The Soviets had overwhelming firepower, unlimited ammunition, a seemingly endless supply of men. They had tanks and aircraft and everything that modern warfare required. The Finns had frozen ground, bolt-action rifles, and an unshakable determination not to surrender their country. One defensive position, called Killer Hill by the Finns, exemplified the impossible mathematics of the battle. 32 Finnish soldiers faced an entire Soviet regiment, nearly 4,000 men. The battle lasted hours. When it ended, over 400 Soviets were dead. 28 of the 32 Finnish defenders had fallen, but the position held. 4 men remained alive, and the Soviets had been stopped. The Soviets managed to penetrate the Finnish defense line several times, pushing the Finns out of their positions. Each time, systematic counterattacks restored the line. On March 12th, near the end of the war, the Soviets formed a breakthrough area between 0.5 kilometer and 1.5 kilometers deep in the Finnish defense. It nearly triggered a collapse. General Hägglund considered abandoning the main defense line, but the news from the sector was that the situation was not yet that alarming. He ordered a counterattack. Those orders were rescinded when news of the peace treaty reached the front. Kola had held. Against all odds, against overwhelming force, the line had held. And throughout those months of desperate fighting, Simo Heha had been there, in the snow, watching, waiting, killing. The Day Death. Found the White Death, March 6, 1940. The war was nearly over, though no one knew it yet. The Soviets were making a major push, throwing everything they had at the Finnish lines in a final attempt to break through before negotiations concluded. Heha was operating with a small group of ski troops, defending a critical position. The morning had been productive. 3 confirmed kills before noon. He was relocating to a new position, moving through a shallow trench his unit had dug through the snow. The Soviets were advancing in waves. Finnish machine guns chattered. Mortars thumped. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of cordite. Heiha raised his head to survey the battlefield, to identify his next target. At some point during the engagement, a Soviet soldier spotted him. The bullet was an explosive round, designed to fragment on impact, causing maximum damage. It struck Heiha in the lower left jaw. The impact was catastrophic. His jaw shattered. His left cheek was blown away. Teeth, bone, and blood sprayed across the snow. The explosive round had done exactly what it was designed to do, destroying tissue, fragmenting bone, creating wounds that no man should survive. Heiha collapsed into the trench, his rifle falling from his hands. The soldiers around him kept fighting. They didn't notice immediately. The noise, the chaos, the smoke. It was several minutes before anyone looked down and saw their comrade lying in a pool of blood-stained ice. When they did, they thought he was dead. Half his face was missing. No one could survive that wound. They placed his body on a pile of fallen comrades for transport to the rear. Standard procedure. The dead would be evacuated when there was time, when the fighting slowed. But someone noticed his leg twitch. Private Leo Kuika looked closer and screamed for a medic. Simo Heiha was alive. Barely. Impossibly. But alive. He was rushed to a field hospital, then evacuated to a proper medical facility. The damage was catastrophic. His upper jaw was mostly destroyed. His lower jaw was cut in 2. Most of his left cheek was gone. Doctors weren't sure he would survive the night. They operated for hours, removing fragments of bone and bullet from his skull, stopping the bleeding, wiring what remained of his jaw together. Simo Heiha lay in a coma for 7 days. He woke up on March 13, 1940. The same day the Moscow Peace Treaty was signed, ending the Winter War. His first act upon regaining consciousness was to ask for a newspaper. A nurse brought one. The front page announced his death. The Soviets had spread the news as propaganda, claiming they had finally killed the White Death. Heiha couldn't speak. His jaw was wired shut, his face wrapped in bandages. So he asked for paper and pen. His handwriting was shaky, uneven, but the message was clear. He was alive. The war was over. Finland had survived. The price of survival. Heiha spent 14 months in hospitals, undergoing 26 surgical operations to reconstruct his face. The scarring was permanent. His jaw never fully healed. His speech was affected for the rest of his life, slurred and difficult to understand. The left side of his face drooped. Children sometimes stared. Adults looked away. The Winter War ended with a Soviet victory on paper. Finland ceded 11% of its territory, including Heiha's home village of Rauchervi. His family farm was now on the wrong side of the border. Everything he had grown up with, the forests where he learned to hunt, the fields where he worked alongside his father, all of it belonged to the Soviet Union now. But the moral victory belonged to Finland. A nation of 3.7 million people had held off a superpower of 168 million for over 3 months. The Red Army lost at least 126,000 dead, possibly as many as 250,000. They lost 2,000 tanks, 700 aircraft. Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev later admitted, "All of us, and Stalin first and foremost, sensed in our victory a defeat by the Finns." It was a dangerous defeat because it encouraged our enemy's conviction that the Soviet Union was a colossus with feet of clay. Adolf Hitler was watching. The Red Army's humiliation in Finland convinced him that the Soviet military was weak, poorly led, unprepared. It was one of the factors that led him to launch Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. The Winter War's aftermath would shape the course of World War II. When the Continuation War broke out in 1941, Finland's second conflict with the Soviet Union, Heiha requested permission to return to the front lines. His request was denied. His injuries were too severe. His war was over. Field Marshal Carl Gustaf Emil Mannerheim personally promoted him from corporal to second lieutenant, the largest single promotion in Finnish military history. He was awarded the Cross of Kola, the Medals of Liberty, and numerous other honors. But Heiha didn't want medals. He wanted to go home. The Finnish government gave him a farm in Ruokolahti, a small village in southeastern Finland, a replacement for the home he had lost to the Soviets. He moved there after his recovery and spent the next 60 years living quietly. The long peace. He farmed. He raised dogs. He hunted moose in the same forests where he had once hunted men. He rarely spoke about the war. His reputation followed him, but he avoided attention whenever possible. In the 1960s, President Urho Kekkonen, himself an avid hunter, invited Heiha to join him on a moose hunt. The old sniper accepted. They spent 3 days in the forest together, barely speaking. Kekkonen later told aides it was one of the most peaceful experiences of his life. He moves through the forest like water, Kekkonen said. No sound, no wasted motion. Even now, at 60 years old, he sees things other men miss. Heiha killed 2 moose on that trip. Both shots were perfect. Old skills don't fade. He never married. He never had children. His closest companion was his hunting dog, a Finnish Spitz that followed him everywhere, slept at the foot of his bed, waited by the door when he went into the forest. The fame never left him. Journalists came to interview him throughout the decades. Military historians wanted to understand his techniques. Younger generations of Finns knew his name, his story, his legend. He turned most of them away. He was a modest man who never boasted about his wartime achievements. When asked in 1998 how he had become such a skilled sniper, Heiha gave a one-word answer: practice. When asked if he felt remorse for killing so many men, he said, "I did what I was told to do as well as I could. There would be no Finland unless everyone had done the same." The memories never fully faded. He would wake in the darkness, heart pounding, the sound of gunfire still echoing in his mind. He would sit by the window until dawn, watching the snow fall, remembering the men who had fallen in it. He never talked about these nights, but his neighbors knew. They saw the light in his window at 3 in the morning. They saw the exhaustion in his eyes. In December 2001, just before his 96th birthday, Heiha gave a rare interview to a Finnish newspaper. It was Independence Day, and the reporter asked him about his experiences in the Winter War. For the first time in decades, he opened up. He talked about the cold, the endless waiting, the moment before each shot. He talked about watching young Soviet soldiers die in the snow, boys who had been conscripted into an army they didn't believe in, fighting a war they didn't understand. He talked about waking up in the hospital with half his face gone, reading about his own death in the newspaper, and he talked about Finland, about what it meant to defend your home, about why some things were worth killing for and worth dying for. There would be no Finland, he repeated, unless everyone had done the same. The legend lives on. Simo Heiha died on April 1st, 2002, in a veterans nursing home in Hamina, Finland. He was 96 years old. He had outlived the Soviet Union itself by 11 years. His funeral was quiet, a small gathering of family and veterans. No state ceremony, no military parade, just an old man being laid to rest in the country he had helped save. He was buried in Ruokolahti, the village where he had spent his final decades. His grave is simple, a stone marker in a Finnish churchyard surrounded by the forests he had loved since childhood. Today, the Kola and Simo Heiha Museum stands in Mikkeli, preserving the memory of Finland's Winter War and its most famous soldier. His rifle is there, his medals, photographs of a young man with bright eyes and a slight smile. Before the war, before the wound, before the weight of 500 deaths settled on his shoulders. The soldiers who fought alongside him are almost all gone now. The Soviet soldiers he killed have been forgotten, anonymous casualties in a war their own country tried to erase from history. But the legend of the White Death endures. Simo Heiha killed 505 confirmed enemy soldiers in fewer than 100 days, an average of 5 kills per day in a season when Finland receives only 4 hours of usable daylight. He did it without a telescopic sight, using iron sights that his contemporaries considered outdated and inferior. He did it at -40 degrees, lying motionless in the snow for hours, holding ice in his mouth so his breath wouldn't betray his position. He did it alone, against an enemy that sent counter-sniper teams, artillery barrages, and mass infantry assaults to kill him. He survived being shot in the face with an explosive bullet, woke from a coma on the day the war ended, and lived for another 62 years. He never boasted, never sought fame, never explained his methods beyond one word: practice. When they called his iron sights obsolete, he proved that the weapon doesn't make the warrior. When they called his tactics suicide, he turned those tactics into the most effective killing system of the Winter War. When they sent an army to hunt him, he hunted them instead. When they finally shot him down, he refused to die. Simoheha, the White Death, the greatest sniper who ever lived. 5'3" of farmer's muscle and hunter's patience. A man who understood that sometimes the simplest tools are the best tools, that technology can be a liability as often as an advantage, that true skill comes not from equipment, but from endless practice and absolute dedication to craft. And all he ever wanted was to go home. If you found this story as compelling as we did, please hit that like button and subscribe to WW2 Echoes. We bring you the forgotten heroes of history every week. Men and women whose courage changed the world, but whose names have been lost to time. Your subscription helps these stories reach more people who need to hear them. Thank you for watching.